I'm Emilie and I believe with my whole heart and soul that our homes are places where we can seek and love the truth, celebrate beauty, and learn good things every single day. That's why I'm educating my kids at home, and I know you can do it too. Welcome to Heart and Soul Homeschool. Well, I've been looking forward to today's episode for a really long time because I get to introduce you to one of my good friends, someone I go to church with and who I admire so much. We teach Bible studies together. I get to teach her kids, and I know you're going to love the conversation today as you meet her. Her name is Dr. Allison Lassiter. Allison, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming out. So you and I met probably last summer is really when we started talking. Yeah. And we do go to church together, and we have kids about the same age. But before we jump into our topic today, would you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your family?
Yes. So I'm Allison Lassiter. I am a part-time homeschool mom, and I'm a part-time professor at a local community college. And I have 3 children. They are 3, 5, and 7. And
they're super cute. I'll throw that in there. She's got some of the most adorable kiddos.
They're all boys. They're all boys. So it's kind of constant mayhem at our house. But so I have those 3, and that I'm raising with my husband, Ben.
Well, great. Well, so I wanted to talk to you today because you're interesting for several reasons when it comes to education topics, because let's start with you. So you had quite an eclectic education background yourself. You kind of got a taste of it all.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I was homeschooled kindergarten, or not homeschooled. I was public schooled kindergarten through 3rd grade. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think my mom had ever considered anything besides public schooling. Some of the people you've had on your show before that talk about vintage homeschooling, I don't know if my mom would be vintage, but she was pretty early.
Kind of leading edge.
Yeah.
So back when there weren't resources, the internet wasn't a thing like it is now.
I mean, I remember her buying curriculum in a lady's basement.
Yeah.
Like that was, you had to really know people.
Yeah, that's pretty old school.
Yeah, it is. So for me, and I think this is kind of unlike a lot of the homeschoolers at that time, but I was falling behind in math academically.
In public school.
In public school. They were doing a lot of, well, first of all, they were doing whole word learning for reading, which wasn't a problem for me because reading was an area I had a strength in. But mathematics, they did a lot of group work, which may have been the teachers, it may have been the educational philosophy at the time. But what was happening is I was falling behind. I was letting other people do the group work, and so I wasn't really learning a lot. And my parents initially pulled me and had me, they actually hired one of the teachers in the school to work with me after school and try and get me caught up in mathematics, and it just wasn't working. And so after my 3rd grade year, my mom decided to pull me, and my dad thought she was crazy. Today he will say, well, I was waiting to see how it turned out to see if I supported it or not. So now he would say he's an advocate.
You guys turned out okay.
Yeah, but it was definitely not the norm. No, definitely not. So she pulled us for academic reasons, my brother not so much. But so it was me and my younger brother, he's 3 years younger. And so he went to public school just for kindergarten, and then she pulled him. Okay. Then I was homeschooled 4th through 8th grade. And then in 9th grade, I went to a collaborative school that went Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And that was kind of the high school model. And then we had our assignments on Tuesday and Thursday. So you could homeschool with that model, or you could just send your kids to that
just
as
do the
your
3
primary
and
school.
That would have been. So tell us what you're doing professionally now.
Yes. So my background, I have an undergraduate degree in English and education, a master's and a doctorate in education. I work at a community college teaching in a learning strategies department. Like we are helping students who are not prepared to get prepared for the academic rigor of college. And that means studying, that means how do you read your textbook effectively, memory strategies, things like that. And I also, on the flip side of that, I also help with career exploration and how do you pick a major, that kind of stuff. So that's what I've been doing. But I've also supervised student teachers as part of my doctorate as well.
Okay, so as you guys can see, Allison has lots of great insight on education as a whole. And so that's what we're going to talk to her about today. So you mentioned that you are a part-time homeschooler. So right now, lots of Christian people, especially, are considering alternatives to traditional public school. And so a lot of those families, traditional solutions don't necessarily work. So in the homeschool world, I would say like the norm is for mom to stay home and homeschool the kids, and dad goes to work and provides for the family. And so in some cases, that's just not a possible solution for financial reasons, or sometimes, mom has a great career like you enjoy. And so you kind of want to find a solution where you get to homeschool part of the time and not the whole time.
Yeah.
So I think that can be a great eye opener for families who are looking to do something different but may not know all the options. So tell us about the school that your kids attend right now.
So it's kind of similar to the high school that I went to. It is a classical collaborative Christian school. And so they go on Monday, Wednesday, Fridays. And then on Tuesday, Thursdays, the teachers send home what we are to work on. So we aren't choosing the curriculum. So that's a deviation from a typical homeschool environment. But we are given kind of the space to work with them one-on-one, and we get to choose a little bit as far as the pacing goes. Like, do we spend a lot of time reviewing our phonograms, or do we kind of have that and we need to spend more time on math? So it's homeschooling, but without some of the curriculum decision
without the total
making.
choice that maybe traditional homeschoolers would have. But you mentioned that it is a Christian collaborative school. Others might refer to it as a hybrid.
Yes.
And so you and I really connected over our love of Christian education. We both feel really strongly about that, and I know your husband Ben does too. So before we get into sort of more of the dynamics of this hybrid collaborative model, talk a little bit about how you and Ben came to the conclusion that you wanted your kids to have a Christian education, whatever that looked like.
Yeah. So Ben was public schooled all the way through. And so his story is a little bit different than mine. Mine, having taught high school in the public school, the first thing that concerned me was a lack of rigor. I was teaching 11th grade, and they were writing really their first major research paper in 11th grade. And to me, that was far too late, and presented some problems for those kids, because a lot of the things, like I'm trying to teach them, no, that's a fragment or that's a run-on. And some research shows that the best time to really understand grammar, for it to really solidify, is in the middle grades, like in 6th, 7th, 8th. And so we went through we did some revising of the curriculum to try and do a grammar boot camp with these kids, and it just wasn't sticking in the same way. And I just didn't want that for my kids. So that was one piece of it. But then the other piece is I was convicted, and my husband was convicted about the discipleship, and that these are our children, and if we want to raise them to really truly have a good, deep faith, then we need to be investing in Christian education. And I will also say not just any Christian education. I was very particular about what type of Christian education. I really wanted a strong apologetics curriculum, and that's partially why we picked the classical model, besides it being also collaborative.
Right.
So, and my husband's story was really just some of the situations that he was exposed to, and some of the peer groups, and some of those things. He just didn't want that for our kids.
Just the typical things that you hear about, public schools and the company, and that happens in all school settings.
Right.
But in particular, I think that there are issues there. And so let's talk about the hybrid model, because this is a little bit tricky in the homeschool world. So some homeschoolers would say that you are not really a homeschooler because you're not picking your curriculum, and because you're not the one who is submitting the grades, keeping track of the records and that kind of thing. And I will say that there are different kinds of hybrid models. And so in some of them, your kids do go those 3 days, but you are ultimately responsible for keeping their records. And so I think we should point out that there are a lot of differences. So if this sort of timing where your kids go for 3 days and then home for 2, and some of them are flip-flopped, if that's of interest, there are a lot of different ways that can look, right?
Sure.
So we just kind of want to open the eyes to this model. But within your school, do you find, so you consider yourself a part-time homeschooler, is that the term that most other families at your school would use, or what do you think?
The school calls us co-teachers.
Okay.
So they consider us to be co-teaching. I think individually people might agree or disagree with that. Obviously, when they adopt new curriculum, we do have a voice and we do have channels to go through. And a lot of times they'll have a formal sort of meeting to kind of have those
like a
discussions.
review process where you can give your input and make sure that
Yes.
it's something that complements what your values that you're wanting to teach at home.
Yes.
So it truly is a collaborative process.
Yes, it's and it should be. It is, but and this sounds crazy coming from with all the degrees I have in education, but I was in the middle of my doctorate when we started, and I did not have the bandwidth to go through and pick curriculum, and I watched my mom do that, and I saw how labor intensive it can be, especially of course when she was homeschooling and there was less internet.
Sure, absolutely.
And so, I feel equipped to be able to pick that? Sure, but I also feel called to my current profession, and and so that was kind of our middle ground there.
Yeah, so this allows you, and this is why I want to talk to you, this allows you to kind of get the best of all worlds, where you're really, really involved with your kids' education and pouring into them and discipling them, while also, fulfilling a calling that you have outside the home. And I think that there are a lot of moms who feel that way. You and I have talked about this. I was able to set my career that I really enjoyed aside to stay home with our kids, and now I'm a homeschool mom. But there are a lot of women, as more and more people decide to pull out of the traditional school settings, that either need to continue careers or want to continue careers. And this is a really cool way that you can have that opportunity to be with your kids and also pursue a career at the same time while everyone's getting what they need and that good solid Christian foundation. So I love this model and find it to be really fascinating. So you mentioned a little bit that this is a classical school. We hear that term a lot in homeschool, and this isn't a quiz. But can you just give us maybe a couple of main points that makes classical different from other methods of homeschooling?
Yeah, so the classical system is based on the trivium, right? Which if you are an educator, the way it would be probably easiest to think about this is Bloom's taxonomy and thinking about the way we learn. And so they call the trivium grammar, logic, and rhetoric, and it's kind of how we process knowledge. And so the first stage is, according to Bloom's taxonomy, would be to know and understand, right? So we've got to memorize information that's foundational for us to be able to then apply it and have an analysis type of period, which are the next couple stages in the taxonomy. And then the final stage, which would be the rhetoric stage, is to be able to defend and support beliefs. And that would be kind of the create level of the Bloom's taxonomy. So if it helps to kind of bridge those two worlds, that's kind of the language on both sides of that aisle. But really what classical school is looking at is teaching kids how to think rather than what to think. And so the idea, and like I said, apologetics was really important to me. I really want my children to be able to be good critical thinkers, because we can't shelter them from everything that's going to come their way in the world, even while they're in our home. And so I want them to be able to look at an idea and really examine it and break down, like, where's a logical fallacy here, and where's the support, and what does it come from? Does that align with the Bible? I want them to be able to think that way, and classical education is very much in line with that.
Yeah, very much so. The critical thinking piece is, I think, what I think of most when I think of classical education, really focusing on that. And then almost not a debate, but kind of what you were saying, being able to, I guess, regurgitate that information in a way that makes sense to others. And so I think hearing you talk about that, I can see why the classical model works really well in these hybrid type models, because it does allow you as a parent to sort of coach your kids in that critical thinking and those things that really matter when it comes to the apologetics for our faith and those kind of things, to apply that within your family in ways that maybe go a little deeper than they would even get just in a traditional classical school where they were with teachers every week. So I think that's a really neat thing about what you're doing. So what is something that you just absolutely love about this model? And then after that, let's talk about something that's kind of maybe a little bit challenging that parents could be aware of.
Yeah, so I think if you some of your other guests have talked about this, but just the idea that each child is so unique. They're created by God, and they are very different, even if they come from the same two parents.
Yep.
And so
it's amazing how different they can be.
It really is. And so for me, just the ability to speed things up or slow things down, not to make I didn't want to make those decisions, right? As far as curriculum, at least at this moment in our lives, but I wanted to be able to adapt that curriculum to meet their needs. And so I have a child that picks things up really quickly. And the thing we're working on with him is having a growth mindset. He does not like challenges. Anytime he's wrong, it's the end of the world. And so we work a lot on just trying to push him enough so that he does fail. He's doing chess right now, and that's been a good learning experience for that. But just enough that he is failing, because this is the time for him to fail and fail in that supportive environment.
And that's something that you as a mom can pinpoint and do.
Yeah, that wouldn't be
noticed. Possible. Yeah,
No.
in a traditional classroom
Not
setting.
Not even at his school, which has a much smaller, class ratio, class to teacher ratio, but they're not going to flag that as an issue, right?
And that's why, what you said earlier about how you and Ben are so convicted that you guys are responsible. And so even though you're delegating part of this, and we all feel comfortable delegating different parts of our kids' education at different times, you're delegating part, but ultimately you're taking that ultimate responsibility to study your child and to know what he needs at that time, which is a really great advantage to this model.
Yeah, it is. And it's really a privilege. It's a struggle, right? I think in your first episode you talked about it being sanctifying, and I think that is a great great word.
Everything's hard. I have heard a lot of homeschoolers lately say, you just pick your hard, because it's hard to send kids to public school because you've got a lot that you need to address, right? That they might hear or pick up on. It's hard to send kids to private school because, there's still that effort of getting there. There's a financial sacrifice, and it's hard to homeschool. And so we all, under that umbrella of doing what God has called us to do, to take responsibilities, to be the primary teachers of our kids, that delegation, you pick your hard, right?
Right.
And so this is one way that you're coming alongside your kids. So what is a challenge or a couple of challenges that you find with this model?
Well, the challenge is that we don't get to pick the curriculum, right? I chose it because I didn't want to do that, but at the same time,
it's a double-edged sword.
It is. And there are things that, we played some math game the other day, and I was like, all right, this
needs to be done.
Yeah, we're gonna call it good at this point. And there's obviously a community that can kind of come around you and help you understand and support you and maybe gripe with you, right? But and so you're ceding a little bit of that control, but at the same time, you have that freedom at home to say, all right, enough's enough on this. But, within reason, obviously, that you can't go completely rogue with this model. But that is a challenge, right? Is that you aren't getting
You're
to
not
choose
in total
everything.
control. Yeah, that's really interesting. I think that would help people who are maybe thinking this through. So let's switch gears just a little bit, because, I get to see your family at church, and I know that you've got two sets. Both you and Ben have parents who are local to you guys and who are really involved in your lives. And so because you guys have kind of an interesting set up with your family where, your professor Allison some days and homeschool mom Allison other days, it seems like your family really supports you.
Yeah.
And you and I have mutual friends at church who are a few steps ahead of us, just a little older, who are getting into the grandmothering stage. And so we're talking a lot about how they can help their kids who are getting ready to have kids, educate their kids in a Christian school or a homeschool. And so talk a little bit about some ways that your parents have been really helpful to you that might encourage either moms like us who are listening who might, want to say, hey mom, have you ever thought about doing this? Or, we might have some grandparents out there who are wondering, how could I come alongside my adult children as they seek to educate their kids in a way that would honor the Lord?
Yeah. Well, I've seen a lot of different people do this differently. In our family, the 3-year-old is just turning 3 this week, and so he has been with grandparents when the other 2 are in school, because the way I work my schedule is I teach Monday, Wednesday, Friday classes. So while they're at school, I'm teaching, but that doesn't work for the the baby,
right?
right?
Yeah.
And so they have been all in as far as childcare for that, which has been an enormous blessing. My mom has also stepped in. So my middle child, if I had to diagnose him right now, I would tell you he probably has ADD. I do myself. And so he's just very easily off track. But there are lots of beautiful things with that, like in hyper-focusing and different things. But for him, that means it's hard being in the middle when you're like that. And so my mom has been taking him on Tuesdays and just spending some time just one-on-one with him to just work on some academic skills, to encourage him to do things in a way that are of interest to him. Lots of Paw Patrol books over there that I do not have. And so she's been a great resource as far as just trying to help him along. And so that's been phenomenal. I've seen at FCA, there are parents that there are grandparents that do the homeschooling. And so they're coming alongside the families in that way. And there are some that are just financially supporting the family so that they can afford to do it, where the whole financial burden isn't on them. So I've seen a lot of different options.
Yeah, I think that's really cool to hear all those ways, because with everything going on in education in our country, and especially for those of us who are Christians, it seems like a moment in history where we need to be all hands on deck and thinking of all the solutions and all the different possibilities. And so I love that, what you're doing is a little bit outside of the box, and then, there are all these generational connections coming alongside. I hope that inspires. I hope people listening will think about how they can come alongside people who are trying to get this done. So again, we're going to switch gears just a little bit. So the topic of education, it's everywhere. I mean, we're hearing it in the news everywhere, from K-12 education all the way up to what's going on in the Ivy Leagues. There really isn't anywhere that you don't hear education coming up. And you and I have talked about this. We hear a lot of conversations at our church in families who have traditionally been involved in the public schools, and who maybe are just starting to think about educational alternatives, or some have already made that decision. And so there's just a lot going on. And I think you and I have talked about how this can easily become a very divisive topic, because I personally, and I'll be interested to hear what you think, I think it is a very, very personal topic, right? Because no one really wants anyone to tell them how to raise their kids.
Right.
And so these are things that are sensitive issues. There are a lot of decisions and factors. It becomes a financial issue. It becomes a, career issue. All of these things that just kind of combine to make it one of those like, oh, this is a little hard to have those conversations. And yet, at the same time, I think you share my desire to speak the truth, in certain situations. And so how have you navigated that with friends and family members, maybe even, who share your faith but have just different convictions about education?
Well, first of all, we joke in our house that I needed my husband. My husband is a pastor's kid, and so he was always very aware of people's perceptions of things. And I remember early on dating being like, why do you care? Like, why can't I talk about this?
It's like living in a fishbowl his whole life, right?
And so he has. And then I realized, well, you really do know a lot of people, but
got to be on your best behavior everywhere you go.
But it actually has really helped me, because I can be the one who just speaks without thinking first. And so it's
Me too, sister.
It's been a very good balance to have him just as that checkpoint to be like, think about your audience before you stick
read the
your foot in
room,
your mouth.
Allison. Yes, I have to remind myself that frequently.
Yes, and so that's been really helpful. And then the other thing I kind of take to heart, my brother at one point, and I don't remember when this was, but was talking about having difficult conversations. They weren't to do with education, but with some of his friends, and was talking about the way he does that is asking probing questions instead of telling people. And it's exactly what you just said. Like, people don't want you to say, you need to do X, Y, or Z. But just asking people, like, what are your challenges with the choice that you've currently made? What are the challenges that you see if you did make a change? Are there ways around that? What could be some possible solutions? And I've had those conversations where we kind of brainstorm and think about, things like Most Scholars in Missouri that provide some school choice money and different things like that to kind of help some of these people to maybe get out of a situation they don't want to be in. Or I had a conversation last Friday about just people that are choosing public education but are trying to really keep their ear to the ground and just having a good conversation about what are they seeing, what are they checking, are they looking at the classroom libraries, are they having conversations with the principal about how to handle sensitive issues, discipline issues, those types of things. And so really just kind of being relational really is kind of the solution I've found to that. And then when it comes up, being really open and frank about why I've chosen something different.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the same approach that we take. And like you, I have to remind myself, myself, I only have one self, myself, just to be diplomatic in it and realize that we're all at different places, that I have blind spots, we all do about different things, and that, shockingly, my perspective isn't always right. And so I think, Jared, my husband, and I have just sought to be really open about what we're doing and why when we're asked, and to make what we're doing as beautiful as possible. We love what we do, and we would love to tell anyone why we do it, and to kind of offer an apologetic and encouragement to anyone who would want to do similarly or has questions. And I think that's what I see you and Ben doing at church. I think that's good counsel to all of us, and not just about education, but really about any kind of sticky topic, because there are any number of those that we could talk about in our church families right now. So one thing, we live in a more conservative area of the country. I would say we would call ourselves definitely a red area of a pretty red state. And so I find that for Christian people, especially who live maybe in smaller towns and have a lot of ties to the educational system there, that it's kind of hard to believe that these things that we hear about on the news that are happening in schools, that they are actually happening in their school. And so I think we all, come again to those realizations at different times, and we all have sort of a different tolerance for what is okay for our family, right? And so being in the education field, and you mentioned that you've been involved in training teachers at certain points in your career, if Christian parents aren't concerned right now, what are some things that they should be looking for going forward? Well,
I think one of the myths is that public education is neutral, and it is far from it. And a lot of the people we've talked to at our church, a lot of their decision to remain in public school has to do with what teacher, is shepherding their child. And I think that is a good pulse point. But we also need to be aware of what's in the library and what other people are they interacting with on a daily basis. And I think from the collegiate system, which we know is very left-leaning, there is absolutely an agenda to indoctrinate teachers with certain belief systems. And so that trickles down. And sometimes in unconscious ways, even Christian people that have been educated can sometimes have adopted certain things, maybe without thinking about whether or not that actually holds with their Christian worldview or not. And so now, in the same way, like when I taught high school, I taught American literature primarily. And so, when we got to the Puritan unit, I could talk a lot about like what did the Puritans believe, and really give them a robust foundation for some of that, and handle some of those discussions in class with my own Christian worldview when asked. That's kind of the deal in public school, is you can't really say unless you're asked. But that doesn't mean, so I'm handling that and sort of infiltrating my beliefs into it that way. The same thing's happening with people with other belief systems. There's a whole mess of literature out there about how to do that with some of these differing values and ideologies, and how to integrate those subtly. And I think the other myth is...
You mean teaching teachers how to infiltrate these beliefs that parents may or may not agree with.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think we also believe that, the school board approves all their curriculum. Well, no. Like the school board checks, the textbook that I taught and the novels that we taught, those were all pre-approved. But I taught short stories and I taught debate, and nobody was checking that.
So you have a lot of room as a teacher to add your perspective, the things that you like, the things that you want to incorporate in as well. And I think that's eye-opening for all of us as teachers or as parents, thinking about there's like the overall system and the things that are everywhere. And then the individual teacher level, which can be great. You can get the wonderful teacher that you sit next to on Sunday mornings, or as we see new teachers coming out of teachers' colleges, probably eyes wide open, that more and more they're being taught in a way that we probably wouldn't want their belief system subtly incorporated into our kids' classrooms. So I think that's really helpful.
And I think if you think about it, in their value system, they believe that that it is indispensable for them to indoctrinate children in some of these things.
It's almost like a religion in a way. Yeah.
It is. I mean, like they definitely believe that, if I don't do this, then I might be contributing to bullying or suicide ideation.
There's a lot of deception,
that.
Right, that's gone on in our culture about all of those things, just confusion and deception. And
well, we've talked about the book Mama Bear Apologetics in that chapter where they talk about the theft of language, and like that is so pervasive. And so if you teach people that they are intolerant if they don't believe the same things that you believe, like teachers are equally susceptible to that and to then just regurgitating what they've heard.
Yeah, I appreciate your perspective as someone who's kind of inside the system in a way, because I think a lot of times as homeschoolers, we're eager to, say what we're against. And so I think it's easy to come across as like we are against the public school, we're against public school teachers, we're against families who go to, all of those things. And I think that there's a lot of caring that we can do. And a lot of times people will turn to us just because they see us doing something different and have questions. And so the way that we respond, the way that we learn about what's actually going on and not just seeing a boogeyman around every corner, but also having the appropriate level of concern about things like what you just said, so that we can kind of have an apologetic for what we do and why, and then have good reasoning and wisdom to offer those who might be having questions, who are looking to do something different. So I appreciate your perspective on that a lot. We're going to wrap up here, but as we do you have just one final word of encouragement for families who might not have the option to pursue homeschooling in a traditional sense, where mom stays home, dad goes to work, that kind of thing, but who are intrigued by some of these more out-of-the-box homeschooling solutions that we've talked about? What would you say as a final word of encouragement?
Well, I would just say that with the rise of homeschooling has come a rise in some of these other models, right? Co-ops and co-ops that are only one day, or co-ops that are multiple days, co-ops that are kind of more of a hybrid, but you're expected to teach. I don't know.
Right. Like you drop them off at some, you teach at some. There's so many options. It's amazing.
There's even the kind of capsule type of communities where
like
we're trading
pods,
off. Yes, we're trading off responsibilities so that I can go in this day or whatever. Yeah. Like there are a lot of options out there, and I think sometimes they're underground, and I think sometimes it's hard to really find out what you're.
Yeah, it's not formalized.
Yeah, there needs to be some sort of system where you could just Google it and find all the options in your area. But it does tend to be talking to people and finding out, what are you doing over here, and did you hear of this other system this way? The co-op that's at our church, I know there's another co-op that's being birthed off of that one. And so like that's happening all the time.
Yeah,
and
it's
so
exciting.
Yeah, it really is. And so just keeping your eyes and ears open to see what options may be available in your areas, because you may be surprised at what's really out there.
Yeah, I think that's really encouraging. So thank you, Allison, for being here today.
Thanks,
and I hope that you all have enjoyed our conversation as much as I have, and I hope you'll join me next week for the next episode of Heart and Soul Homeschool.
Heart and Soul Homeschool is a podcast presentation of the Herzog Foundation. The views and opinions expressed on the show are those of the host and guests, and not necessarily the views of the Herzog Foundation. Be sure to like and subscribe to the show so you never miss an episode of Heart and Soul Homeschool.